Welcome, everyone, and a very good evening to you. I promise this is going to be scintillating and provocative. What else?
She can fulfill that promise, I won't have to.
How can it be otherwise when Shashi Tharoor is my guest? A Renaissance man with interests so wide and repertoire of books so large that if I were to talk about just a few of them, I think it'll exhaust our time. So, but I'm sure you will refer to some of your books in the answers to...
Depends on what you ask, Seema.
to give a flavor to our audience. This evening, we're going to discuss the complexities of India, the tensions and harmonies within. Is it India or Bharat? I'm sure you're familiar with the latest controversy over the name, which itself wraps many paradoxes. But for the ease of doing business this evening, we're going to stick to India. Is that okay?
Sure, but I would be very happy to address that controversy. A totally unnecessary controversy, I might add.
So Mark Twain famously described India as the cradle of the human race, the land of dreams and romance, of fabulous wealth and fabulous poverty, of splendor and rags, of palaces and hovels, the country of 100 nations and 100 tongues, the sole one country under the sun that is endowed with an imperishable interest for alien prince and alien peasant, for the lettered and ignorant, the wise and the fool, rich and poor, and so on. Fast forward to modern times, and we have a rather prosaic version of the same idea in the words of Cambridge economist Joan Robinson, who said, "Whatever you can rightly say about India, the opposite is also true." So let's try to unpack some of it. India has shown quite powerfully that how democracy can flourish despite a multitude of languages, religions, ethnicities. After 7 decades of a largely successful democratic experience, democracy has gone deep into our society. The electoral system is institutionalized, there is peaceful transfer of power, and candidates don't question election results, unlike in some other places that we know of. So there's better representation of marginalized groups, more devolution of power to the village level. Yet, there is a parallel trend these days, a certain erosion of liberal democratic values. One top government official tried to explain and try to justify this by saying the backsliding as a case of too much democracy and too much federalism too quickly. Now, are these phenomena interlinked? Does one lead to another? Or has democracy not gone deep enough? What would you say?
Well, I think it was in the process of going pretty deep. But, you know, Seema, I'll be very honest, what the international professional observers of democracy have seen in India recently is what has led the VDEM Institute, the Varieties of Democracy Institute in Stockholm, to actually declare India an electoral autocracy. That is, the elections are free and fair, but how the government conducts itself between elections is a good deal less than democratic. Now, what does that mean? It means there is, unfortunately, pressure on the media, which we've seen repeatedly. There's an Indian-American editor who lost his job after he ran a hate tracker in a daily newspaper. There is, I'm afraid, example after example of stories disappearing from websites of major national publications. Yesterday, an NDTV journalist was fired for tweeting about a story that was suppressed. I mean, you've got issues up and down in the media. The autonomous institutions, which were meant to be the repositories of neutrality and integrity above the political fray, have all been, to a greater or lesser degree, brought to heel by the government of the day. To the extent that their autonomy has been hollowed out, their credibility to uphold democratic values is in question. And with all of this going on, we've also seen some fundamental challenges to the basic assumptions of Indian nationhood that people like me grew up with, which is that we're seeing the othering of a particular minority, the Muslim community, in ways that was unthinkable. I mean, things that would not have been said in private behind closed doors are now being declaimed loudly from political platforms in public. And that sort of thing is, frankly, shame-making and has led many of us to question whether we are indeed the land that, as a true democracy, offers a home to people of every stripe, every complexion, every language, every religion, and every kind of political opinion. That's what's become worrying. I mean, you've seen think tanks coming under terrible pressure, civil society organizations losing their tax status, their funding, their right to obtain foreign contributions. All of these things have also undermined the ability of other voices to grow and flourish in our polity. You asked for it, so I'm giving you a very candid answer. We're going around talking of ourselves as the mother of democracy, which is a claim others can also make, the Greeks in particular. But I don't think that too many mothers would treat their children this way.
True. So let's look at politics for a minute. On the one hand, since you're a politician, I think we need to talk about politics also. On the one hand, there is a commitment by all political parties to sort of reduce the pernicious effects of the caste system. Yet, come election time, and parties will choose candidates based mostly on caste calculations. Finding the right candidate from the right caste has become a delicate and fine art. You've been in politics long enough. How do you look at this massive contradiction?
Well, there's been an amazing change from the assumptions about caste in our country. In the 1950s, I think it's fair to say that people like Jawaharlal Nehru assumed caste would simply disappear. Dr. Ambedkar could write and speak of the annihilation of caste as a practice. Today, we are very far from all of that, because what's happened is indeed that political parties discovered that caste could be mobilized as an instrument of political loyalty and political support. And as a result of anything, the Indian electorate and the Indian public are more conscious of caste than ever. We've also had the expansion of the reservation facility, initially written into the Constitution for 10 years, and only for the scheduled castes and tribes, the former Dalits and the Aboriginal people of India, the Adivasis. They had reservations. Initially, reservations, by the way, for the Americans here are quotas, guaranteeing places in government jobs, in parliament, in universities, in medical colleges, and so on, to members of those communities. So that's been extended indefinitely. But in 1989-90, you had the addition of reservations for the so-called other backward classes, which are in fact intermediate castes by caste name. And the result now is that there's a tremendously solid vested interest in all of this, which means that far from caste disappearing, political parties are now calling for a caste census. They say, since our privileges and rights are being encoded through caste, let's know exactly how many of us there are. And for many, this is a potentially explosive issue.
So it'll never go away, you think?
It doesn't look like it. I remember saying to an American friend, all of you live in New York and you know the subway system and the third rail. Well, talking about getting rid of caste from Indian politics, it would be the third rail of Indian politics. Touch it, you get electrocuted instantly. So everyone, frankly, sits around accepting that this is part of the idiom now. There will be appeals to voters on the basis of caste. As you said, candidates will be identified based on how much support their caste might mobilize for them. You also have the cliche now that when you cast your vote your caste.
Right.
But that isn't totally accurate, because obviously no caste functions as a monolith, and individuals of a certain caste affiliation could still have other political preferences. But it becomes a very significant factor. And of course, you might have an election in which two people of the same caste, but representing different parties, are competing against each other. And then caste alone is not enough, but it simply is a factor.
And it's showing up here in the United States as well, problems of caste.
Well, yeah, I know that's become a major controversy now, but I think the idea that you should not discriminate against people on the basis of anything, including caste, is to me unexceptionable. But I think some have seen the use of caste in anti-discrimination legislation as actually a way of discriminating against the Hindu community. And that's got to be resolved, I think, within the Indian American community before it's settled and before it's taken out into the wider community. Mm-hmm. But discrimination of any sort is wrong, and the Indian Constitution says the same thing. So recognizing, for example, people of the former untouchable caste for the purposes of positive affirmative action is fine. We have the world's oldest and farthest reaching affirmative action program. But discriminating against them is unconstitutional. So you can actually draw a line between identifying a caste identity and at the same time using it negatively against people. But it's not an easy minefield to navigate. And I agree with you that certainly that would be one of the paradoxes. We're sort of thrusting madly forward into the 21st century, but we are still very mired socially in a 2,000-year-old institution.